Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Professor. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for the opportunity to speak to this topic today. And it's one of those topics that's a mile wide. So my take today is going to really focus in on business and AI and its implications for Australian business in particular. And when you think about technology and its impact on business, I've been fortunate to work in the technology side of many businesses over the years. And we think about the internet, the last 20 years, the internet has really transformed companies. It's our view that AI is actually a bigger event than the internet. And as much as it relies on the internet, the implications for business and how we're organised, I think, are far greater. The impact is wider and it crosses across every industry. There's not one industry that's going to escape AI. I guess the first thing we should do is really talk about, let's see if the clicker works. Not quite. All right, where do I aim it? There we go. Beautiful. One more. There it is. The first thing, so this graphic here is said to give you a clue as to what is AI. And I think it's one of those areas where it's written about so much that you often don't want to go back a step and say, well, what actually is it? And often people have a different interpretation or call things AI that in fact that aren't AI. And AI often is referred to when people have things called expert systems or a system that is quite prescriptive in terms of its decisioning. But actually what AI is quite fundamentally different in the way that it works to normal software coding. And for the business people in the room, that might be something that hasn't been explained in any great detail. And the big difference between AI and normal software is that AI is trained on data and it's not prescriptive. So normal software works in a very linear fashion. If this, then that, and you proceed down. With AI, it's much more parallel processed. And in terms of the way AI works, what it does is it uses a model to draw inference and ultimately to make a prediction. So actually what AI is a predictive application. And that power of prediction is what really underlies AI. And when you think about it, that's actually something that has very wide application. And in particular, it can work on unstructured data. Normal software requires that the data is very structured, set in tables and is often numeric. The really exciting thing about AI is it can work with pictures, video, voice, and things that we've never really captured in terms of a business asset. So you can start to capture and interpret all the conversations that you have with your clients. Ultimately also, we've heard quite a lot about AI as a threat and that it is going to be something that needs to be feared and that somehow AI will think for itself. I think the good news today is that AI is still relatively early and some people are still calling AI relatively dumb. It operates in a certain field and in a narrow domain, and some professors still call AI as being fairly limited. There's a professor from the New York School of Psychology who calls AI as greedy, brittle, opaque, and shallow. So that doesn't really sound very flattering, does it? So ultimately, if you think of AI in that sense, it gives you a little comfort in that actually it's not really a challenge to a human at this stage anyway. Turning to business, I've been working in Australian business for quite some time, and when you think about businesses and AI, this graphic really shows you, our view that businesses are not really set up for AI. And it's not just because there's a shortage of scientists and a shortage of experts in data science. It really is because there is a real lack of understanding around what real AI is. It's also because AI is really hard. It's hard to orchestrate. It's hard to actually take a data science experiment and turn it into a working piece of software that you can put into production. A lot of Australian companies develop their own software, and it's a very difficult task. When you add in the complexity of data and the way that needs to be orchestrated, it becomes even more difficult. So one of the first things we need to do is think about how we're organised and how is our talent organised within our companies. Because right now we are very siloed in the way that our IT organisations are structured as a very functional group. And when you think about AI and its ability to get much greater insight from clients, AI should really be closest to the CEO and to the heads of marketing and products, not buried deep down in finance, looking at business intelligence or deep data mining. And the real power of AI is in terms of innovation and in terms of efficacy, velocity, and scalability. Imagine if you could take your best employee, train an AI algorithm with their knowledge, and then be able to scale that across your organisation. And that's how things like credit scoring will work in future, where you take your best credit decision experts and you codify their knowledge and turn that into an AI application. You don't need to hire 500 junior people and train them over many, many years. Radiology is another area where it takes many, many years before someone can be proficient in diagnosing radiology. Imagine if you could take the best radiologist and immediately scale their knowledge. So it's a pretty potent opportunity, I think. In terms of Australia, again, we did a survey last year about Australian business attitudes to AI. And being an ex-marketer, I always like to see an attitudinal approach. And unfortunately, we only have 9% of our businesses are pioneers in AI. And when you compare this to the global studies, that's around half compared to where the UK in particular is up to. Interestingly, we've got a number of businesses experimenting with AI and others that are investigating it, which means researching it or whatever, but they're not actually implementing it. So really what we have to do is get a wiggle on, as they say. And the reason for that is that some people are calling this the beginning of the fourth industrial revolution. Now, that's a pretty big call, but when you think about it, the actual application of AI is so big and is so wide that this is widely documented if you go online and search it up. So I'm not overselling it. This really is a big thing, and it is something to take note of. And in terms of responding to it, obviously our company has been set up predominantly to focus purely on AI. But AI impacts every industry, and there's a huge amount of opportunity. Even in our own lives today, all of us watch Netflix. And Netflix is probably the most easy to grasp application of AI. And the way that AI works within Netflix is it recommends shows to you. But interestingly, it doesn't just focus on what's popular, because that's the old school broadcasting methodology where everyone gets to see the same show at 6:30 at night. The great thing about Netflix is it will learn what you like. It learns that people didn't like that show. They turned it off. And then what it does is it helps them to commission their own content. Imagine if that was the case within your own business, where you could actually commission content for customers exactly tailored to what they want. Segmentation of one is something that Netflix does. So that's the real power of AI for business, is that you don't need to create this broadcast mentality, but you can narrowcast and specifically meet needs. 70% of Netflix watching is done because of the AI recommendation, and that's why they have such a long catalogue. And that's why it's so important, because it makes it so interesting to discover new things. One of the things with all technologies is timing. And as you look at that game of Jenga, it's always about, which block do you pull out and make sure that the thing doesn't fall over. But in terms of the AI has been around for a long time, as Alan said earlier, back to the 1950s. But things have changed dramatically to make AI possible today. And although the big technology companies get a lot of the headlines, AI has been democratised, and that really is the opportunity for everyone in the room. For me, there are a number of things that have made this possible, and a lot of them are well known. But the key thing about AI is that the algorithms that power AI are now being open sourced. So actually, where it used to be something that was very proprietary and something that was closely guarded as a secret, the algorithms behind AI are now widely available. And with the advent of the cloud, the processing speed that you need to train the models is now available to everyone, and you only pay when you use it, which is a great model. So actually, AI has become available pretty much to everyone. Now, that doesn't mean that every company can embrace it straight away, because obviously you need people to understand how to do it. So there still is that skill gap. But in terms of the toolkit has been democratised. In terms of the impact, the use cases, in business are wide. And in fact, there's some fantastic research out there around how it's going to impact every industry. But the big industries and the big impacts are going to be in financial services. And that's pretty obvious. That was my heritage. And ultimately, within financial services, half of the activity in a bank or in a financial institution is around data capture or interpreting data, half of the activity. So it's going to have a dramatic impact. We've also heard before about healthcare. Healthcare is going to be massively impacted by AI, but it's also utilities, manufacturing, asset management, and retail. Every industry will be impacted. And it's not just automating old ways of doing business, it's about completely disrupting the way that the business is done. The future of work is a topic that gets a lot of commentary. And in terms of AI, a McKinsey study has determined that 60% of all jobs will be impacted by AI, where 30% of the content within those jobs will be completely automated. So automation is definitely coming. So if the roles within a company are something that can be codified, they will be automated. And that's coming. That's not something that may or may not happen. It will happen. So in terms of how we think about education, education has to fundamentally change. Not just what we learn, but how we learn it. And anyone who's a parent will know that when your kids come home and say, my teachers don't get it, or that curriculum I'm doing is a waste of time. That's a comment you hear at dinner tables all around Australia. So it's something that we need to take action on, because AI will change what you need to know. And particularly it'll change how you learn and how you need to continue learning. And that ultimately is going to impact all of our kids. Here's a picture of some two kids playing with a robot. And ultimately, when you think about what humans are great at, we are still very complex beings. And ultimately, it's human skills that matter in business as well. Skills such as empathy, creativity, and strategic thought. These are things that AI is really bad at. So don't worry, there's still going to be plenty of jobs. I think that also speaks to the argument which always comes back to the STEM subjects and learning more about maths and science. And of course, it's important that we continue to invest in these areas, and we need more PhDs in machine learning. I definitely agree with that. But it's more than that. We need to continue to focus on humanities and understanding how humans work with machines and how to optimise both sides of the equation. Ultimately, it's also about organisational design. Because if you think about the way our organisations have been designed, they're based on a very outdated model about how we interact with customers, how our staff want to work, how people collaborate. All of these things need to be dramatically rethought. Companies need to think in an entirely different way now that we have AI. It is a very fundamental change. In terms of the impact on Australia, I think Alan raised some really interesting thoughts there. I think it does offer a huge opportunity. This is a picture of how we could transform our desert with AI into something different. We can reimagine who we are in the world. And the thought around Australia having the best quality AI is one I really like. Because what it does do is it shortens distances. This is a global phenomenon. It's not something that Australia can opt out of. We can't ban AI, as was suggested as one idea. Clearly, that wouldn't work. But what it does also mean is that as we think about government policy and the amount that was announced in the budget, it's an important first step. But by no means does it put us into the game. What we need to do is think about how we can elevate the awareness of AI and the adoption of it throughout the country. But it also means when we think about our regional neighbours, it's not just about understanding trade and having trade alliances. It's also going to be about data, information sharing, and importantly, ethics. And all of these things need to be thought about in terms of how we think about our neighbours and who are our neighbours. And ultimately, it has great impact on government. In terms of the government obviously can use AI for its HR and for many different things. But ultimately, the government is there to serve the people. So we think that the government could turn AI into IA, where intelligent assistance can be provided to the community. If we were to automate a lot of government services to use AI, we think that we could provide better service. So that is a challenge for the government. Anyone listening out there? But ultimately, what it's about is the empowerment and the opportunity for all of Australia. And I think ultimately it is a very powerful thing for us. I also have thought about the ethics in relation to AI. And ultimately, it's a really important consideration because it won't be enough to tell someone that the system turned them down for a loan or a job or even denied them parole. we're going to need to be able to explain the decisions that AI makes. Explainability is a fundamental part of AI, and this has been legislated for in Europe through the GDPR. So there's ultimately going to have to be some thinking about how you explain what the biases that are inherent in some models are being trained to output. Accountability is another key issue around who is accountable for the decision. If the AI makes the decision, is the business still accountable? Is the consumer accountable? If the self-driving car crashes, who's accountable? Does the insurance pay? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. And ultimately, it's about fairness. AI needs to be about fairness and making sure that it gives out the right kind of recommendation, that it's not biased, and that there is a symmetry, and ultimately that our privacy is rewarded and ultimately maintained. The recent issues in the US around the US election, I think, have brought to the fore in everyone's minds, how is our data being used? And obviously we've all said to our kids, be careful what you post on Facebook. And now we know why we said it. So ultimately, it is a big issue and it's a real one. So I am very supportive of the Turing stamp, and certainly our company would be very delighted to be the first applicant for it. There you go, that's first vote of confidence. So in closing, I guess what I really wanted to say is it really is a very fundamental shift in technology. This isn't just something that's a new app or something that's a new kind of fad that's going to go away. This is a structural change. It's not something that's just evolved over time. It's taken a very long time to come, but it really has come of age. And when you read about it in the press and you think about it for your business, it's something that every company needs to embrace. It's about how am I going to embrace AI? Do we have the right team? And do we have the right approach? And ultimately, how are we going to stand up to the new competitors? Because there will be a whole range of new competitors emerging. So in some ways, it's a great opportunity, but in other ways, it represents a large threat as well, which is if we don't take action, others will. So ultimately, in my view, this is a great call to action. Today, we have to think about what our AI strategy is, both in terms of our business, our government, and ultimately all of our people. Thank you very much.